Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features so that you can get the most out of using them at your own table. Today, my most recent episode, we covered the feats in one of the more recent Unearthed Arcana that dealt with psionic feats. And it got me to thinking specifically. I haven't really touched on feats very much at all in this, but if you've watched one of my other series, Play Your Faves, where I build characters based on comic book characters and video games and stuff like that. I use feats a ton to be able to customize my characters and get them to really emulate the abilities I want. So I thought it would actually be pretty beneficial for this to actually go over feats themselves, how they work, and some of the lesser known feats, are really just going through all of the feats and giving you an idea of how you can use them and how you can kind of customize your builds to really have unique characters. I've said it at least a couple of times. One of the most kind of like frustrating or disheartening things is if you sit down at the table and you and another player have very similar characters, or you guys have made the same choices. Like you both picked like champion fighters or something like that. It can feel really disheartening because you don't really feel special. Anything you can do, someone else can do. And feats are really great way to, even if you do have someone who's the same class, the same subclass at the table, you can use some feats to make your version of that class and subclass play very, very differently. And it can turn into some really unique experiences. So, without further ado, there's a grand total of 43 feats in the player's handbook. I'm not going to do all 43 in a single video because this would be like a 4-hour long video. And while I'm really good at talking, and I tend to enjoy the sound of my own voice, even I'm not that vain. So I'm going to break it up for this video specifically. We're going to tackle the first 15, see how it goes, and then we'll cover the other ones in more manageable chunks. So, for first things first, let's talk about what exactly are feats in 5th edition and how you get them. Feats themselves are something that's been around since the 3rd edition D&D. I don't think they had them in 2nd edition. They had other things that did similar customizability, but they really came into their own in the 3rd edition, where every other level, for the most part, you would pick a feat. And the feats would range from things like giving you proficiency in a new weapon, giving you floating modifiers for certain things like dual dual wielding, gave you the ability to have a lesser modifier on your offhand weapon, making it easier for you to actually be able to hit when you're wielding two weapons. Even some of the things that we have in 5th edition, like meta magic options, like silent spell and things like that. Those were feats in the 3rd edition. The feats themselves would give noticeable but incremental changes to your character in general. Um, in order to build kind of a unique character using feats, you would have to take a good like 3 or 4 along the same kind of path. And there's a lot of prereqs, things like dual wielding required you to have, I think, a dex of 15 minimum, and then improved to dual wielding. You had to have dual wielding first, and ambidexterity was something that worked really well with dual wielding. So feats became really complicated. When we get into fourth edition, um, feats again worked kind of similar, where you got them basically about every other level. And they made small incremental changes, but due to how fourth edition worked, the changes that feats made in fourth edition tended to be a little bit more targeted. You had specific feats for every class, for every variation and the things like that. And then you also had kind of general feats, and you had racial feats. So not only could you have some really interesting options, but each class, by choosing specific feats, you could further customize the class in ways that no other class could do, because certain feats were only for this class or this paragon path or this epic destiny. So again, they were built around the idea of really customizing your playstyle. When we get to fifth edition, they got rid a lot of the rules bloat that was inherent in both the third and fourth edition. Instead of getting feats every other level, now in general, you're only going to get one every fourth level. Another thing that's a little different is in previous editions, feats were a required part of the game. You had to take feats. In fifth edition, they are an optional rule set. You can actually play your entire character from level 1 to level 20 without ever taking a feat. The classes are designed to work really well without them. That being said, they wanted feats to be more than just these little incremental modifications. They wanted each and every feat to drastically alter how you play the game. And so the feats that we're going to go through here are going to be much more, make much larger changes to your character than feats previously. Like, again, third edition feat might add a +1 to your attack rolls, or again, might give you a single new weapon proficiency. These are all going to have multiple things that they change and really change how you can play your character. So, starting off, the first feat in the PHB is called Alert. This is one that kind of gets overlooked because a lot of people don't see... like a lot of people, when they take feats, they look purely for combat abilities, which a lot of feats in here have really well-known, really useful combat abilities. The ones that don't give you direct combat abilities or things like that tend to be a little overlooked, and Alert is one of them. Basically, with Alert, you get 3 different things. You get a +5 bonus to initiative, which is a combat bonus, but people don't really think about it because you roll initiative once at the beginning of combat and then you just go for it. But it's really useful to go for first in combat, especially if you're playing like assassin rogues have a couple of abilities built in, where if they attack someone in the first round, if they attack someone before their turn comes up, they get extra damage or advantage and the things like that. And it's never a bad thing to go before the bad guys, because depending on what your specific makeup of your character is, you may be able to stop an enemy from being able to use their ability, either by taking them out, or like my personal favorite character, my Shadow Monk, liked going for first and actually had a weapon of warning that gave him advantage on an initiative rolls, specifically because he was a stun monkey. So if he was able to go first or second in combat, he could literally just run around and stun every as many people as possible, basically taking them out of the first round of combat. So that's really useful. Second thing is you can't be surprised while you're conscious, which is again really useful and really ignored by most people. And then the third thing, other creatures don't gain advantage on attack rolls against you as a result of being unseen by you. Another really useful thing. And all of these actually have combat potential. Like all of them are about attacks and being surprised in that. And really not a lot of people choose this because none of it translates to damage. None of it translates directly to damage. But it can be really useful. Like I said, if you're playing a rogue, if you're playing a monk, if you're playing a spellcaster, druids, clerics, wizards, all of them that have kind of crowd control abilities, especially characters like clerics, where they can do things like a whole person. That bonus to initiative can be really useful. One of the downsides to alert is a lot of the things you have here can be replicated with a weapon of warning, which again is one of my favorite magic items. But if you, what it is you can't be surprised. So the second ability of alert is built into the weapon of warning. So you can't be surprised. You get advantage on an initiative, which mechanically translates, when you actually look at the numbers, it translates to about a 3.5 actually bonus if you actually used in the numbers. So the bonus on this, the +5, is better than advantage. And if you combine the +5 with advantage, you're never going second. And then the last one is something only alert gets, is that not getting advantage from invisible, which as you get higher level, you will start dealing with invisible creatures and creatures that can use improved invisibility and to attack from there. And you may even start dealing with rogues in that who will hide and then gets this sneak attack damage. So this one feat can prevent all of that. And if you build a character designed around the idea of I want to go first, and I want to make I want to control the battlefield, alert works really well. Second one is Athelete, and this is going to be something that we see in a lot of feats going forward, where either you will get something like Alert, where it just gives you a bunch of different abilities, or you'll get something like Athlete, where the first thing you get is increase your strength or dexterity score by 1 to a maximum of 20. Again, these are supposed to really change how you play your character, and your ability scores and your ability modifiers define how your character does things. They're always added to your rolls and things like that. So increasing them at all is going to make a much bigger change than just giving you an ability or two. So some of these where you don't get as many abilities, they'll just tack on an ability score improvement. Second thing you get, when you're prone, standing up uses only 5 feet of your movement, which again can be useful if it's something that you're dealing with constantly, where you are getting knocked down, or if you are a hyper mobile character. Normally getting up from prone is half your movement. So being able to only use 5 feet, especially if you're like a monk or a barbarian, where at higher levels, half of your movement could be 20 feet. So your ability to just stand up with just 5 feet and then still move around can be really useful. The next thing, climbing doesn't cost you extra movement. Again, for those hyper mobile characters, something I see a lot of players kind of ignore is the idea that even when you're playing on a battle map, you actually the combat itself is not done on a 2D plane, despite the fact that that's what we use to represent it. The world is the three-dimensional, and so using height to your advantage, using differing levels to be able to attack people from above so they can't attack you back, or pushing people off of platforms so they take falling damage. The things like that can be very, very, very useful. And so again, having a really mobile character just means that they're not wasting movement climbing when they don't need to. And then the last one is you can make a running long jump or a running high jump after moving only 5 feet on foot rather than 10 feet. I don't know a ton of the DMs that use the jumping rules. A lot of times it's just like an athletics check and you see if you make it or not. They have rules for jumping. I don't know them off the top of my head because they're so rarely used in my games. But again, this whole thing about Athelete is really built around a hyper-mobile character. Barbarians and monks can get a lot out of this. And there's other feats you can get in here that can increase your movement as well if you really want to, let's say, have a fighter that's very, very mobile. Another thing a lot of people don't think about is if you're prone, melee attacks against you have an advantage. You don't like that. However, ranged attacks against you have the disadvantage. As a ranged character, sometimes it can be beneficial to go prone at the end of your turn when you're far away. Again, with something like this, you could be a really good sniper where you can climb a tree or climb a wall or something, get into a high spot, take your attacks, because I believe the prone condition actually imposes disadvantage on attack rolls. I'm going to look just to confirm that, because for the life of me, I can't think right now. I've got everything but statuses. Come on. No, I don't want spells. Okay, prone. Yeah, so when you're prone, you have disadvantage on attack rolls. However, with the Athelete feat, you can go to prone, which doesn't cost movement, and then coming back out of prone will only cost you for 5 movement. So you can hop up, fire, go back to prone, and anyone that tries to take shots at you are taking them at disadvantage. So again, looking at these feats as more than just, this is the most obvious way to use them, can really give you a much better benefit. Next one is Actor. And this one I like because I do a lot more role-playing than combat because I roll like crap. Again, like Athelete, starts off with increase your charisma score by 1 to a maximum of 20. And this is another thing that I tend to look at. When you get your ability score improvement, which you can either improve 2 ability scores by 1 or 1 ability score by 2, or you can get a feat. Well, if you have like a 15 in your charisma and all of your other scores are even, you only get a boost to your modifier every 2 points. So 12, 14, 16, 18 to 20. So going from 15 to 16 is beneficial. Going from 14 to 15 isn't. So anytime you do have an ability score that's an odd number, instead of improving to it either 2 and getting to the next odd number, or improving that one by 1 and another one by 1 and making another ability score an odd number, find a feat that allows you to improve the ability score that you want to improve, and then you just get extra stuff. while still getting that +1 to your modifier. Actor can be really useful. Bards can be super good with this, but also so can rogues, sorcerers and warlocks when they're charisma based casters. They can also be really good faces, or even paladins. Yeah, improve charisma. You have advantage on charisma deception and charisma performance checks when trying to pass yourself off as a different person. So if you want to play a kind of spy-like character, this is a great way to do that. If you're trying to infiltrate or anything like that, this is going to give you that ability, especially since the third thing you get for actor is you can mimic the speech of another person or the sounds made by other creatures. You must have heard the person speaking or heard the creature making the sounds for at least a minute, and a successful wisdom insight versus your charisma deception can show you're faking it. That is super useful. I don't know how familiar you guys are with classic Disney films, but one of the things that Peter Pan used to do is he could imitate Hook's voice. And so he would kind of yell and make it sound like Hook was commanding his men to do things like release his friends, or do this, or do that. And it was always played off for comedy. But it can be a very effective tactic if you're trying to be sneaky. You know, listening to, you know, the head of the guards for a minute when you're trying to do a prison break, or trying to break into a prison, or maybe listening to a noble's voice for a minute before you try to sneak in to find some information or something, can be extremely useful, because as long as they don't physically see you, with this feat, you sound exactly like the person you're imitating. And that can be really useful. And again, not just for charisma-based characters. Anyone you want to play that you want to be sneaky and kind of deceptive, actors but perfect for. Next one is another one that I see a lot of people just kind of forget exists, and it's a really useful ability. Or a feat. It's called Charger, which is basically whenever you use your action to dash, you can use your bonus action to make a melee attack. Now, that may not sound that great, especially when you get to higher levels and you have multi-attack and things like that. But there's some major benefits to the ability to run double your speed basically and still make an attack, especially for classes that don't have a lot of uses for their bonus action. Things like fighters are very main action focused, and you really have to have a specific subclass of fighter to get a lot of use out of your bonus action. So getting to Charger can be really useful, because it gives you a use for your bonus action, and again, it makes you that hyper mobile kind of character. You can dash halfway across the battlefield and still make your attacks. And especially if you're something like a battle master fighter, where every time they attack, they can add a maneuver onto it, you can really get a lot of use out of your maneuvers. The other thing you get with Charger is if you move at least 10 feet in a straight line when taking that dash action, immediately before using the bonus action to make an attack, you can either give yourself a +5 bonus to the damage roll, which again, I'm going to use Battlemaster Fighter because it fits really well with them. Battlemaster Fighter, a lot of the maneuvers allow you to add your maneuver die to the damage roll, and then you can add another 5 damage on top of that. You can do a lot with a single attack. Despite the fact that fighters get 2, 3, 4 attacks eventually, If the people are far away, or if you really need to get to, like, maybe they have a caster behind enemy lines, and you need to get to that guy first, this can be super useful. The other thing, either you can get +5 bonus to the the attack damage roll, or you can push the target up to 10 feet away from you if you choose to shove and you succeed. Because that's the other thing you can do is instead of making an attack, you can use your bonus action to shove them, which normally just moves them for 5 feet. This allows you to move them to 10 feet. And I've said this in a lot of videos. The controller role from 4th edition and the idea of controlling the battlefield is really useful. The ability to move enemies around and ensure that they're in the place that you want them. Or again, if we're talking about that 3D terrain and stuff like that, where you realize that there's more than just 2 dimensions on a field, the ability to throw someone off a cliff or off a roof or something is a big deal. It's really, really useful and can break the enemy lines. It can make it so that they their plans aren't going to work the way that they wanted them to do. Not to mention, setting up fireballs and little lightning bolts and stuff like that. So, yeah. The next one, this is a really, really popular feat for a number of reasons. It's called Crossbow Expert. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You get the 3 different things. The first thing, you ignore the loading property of crossbows with which you are proficient. Loading property basically forces you for things like crossbows, light and heavy crossbows, and even hand crossbows. It kind of forces you to have an empty hand, because with the loading property, you have to have a hand free to load the next bit of ammunition. Without that, you no longer have to do that. You can use a hand crossbow and a shield, which is kind of what the thing was designed to do. There's some arguments about the idea of dual wielding crossbows with the Crossbow Expert feat, which we'll go into in a second here. Strictly speaking, rules wise, you can't really do it for a couple other reasons, but mechanics wise and flavor wise, you totally can. Second one, and this is why this is so popular, not only with ranged fighters and rogues and the things like that, but also with spellcasters. Being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls. So anytime you're within 5 feet of a target and you try and make a ranged attack, whether it's a ranged spell attack, whether it's a just straight up ranged weapon attack, you have disadvantage because someone's right in your face. With this, you don't. This can be incredibly useful for a whole range of spellcasters. One of the ones I've seen use this most effectively is Blade Pact Warlocks, or Hexblade Warlocks. Simply because Eldritch Blast, unlike most cantrips, as it levels up, instead of just doing more damage, you actually get multiple castings of it. Very similar to how fighters get extra attacks. And with Crossbow Expert, you can basically treat Eldritch Blast as your own multi-attack. You can make 2 attacks at level 5, 3 attacks at 11, 4 attacks at 17, which is the same progression as a fighter, but you also have all the magic and spell casting. And if you take one of the Eldritch invocations, allows you to add your charisma modifier to the damage of Eldritch Blast, which basically makes you a charisma-based. It can make you a charisma-based melee fighter, with a whole host of spells and other things that you can do. So yeah, you see a lot of casters that are making kind of unique builds, like blade singers and stuff like that. Will use Crossbow Expert just so they can have those ranged attacks without the disadvantage. Um, and then the final one, when you use the attack action and attack with a one-handed weapon, you can use a bonus action to attack with a hand crossbow you are holding. The original text for this, and I don't know if it's been errata or not. I don't have the errata up, but I know the text at one point said, and it may still say that somewhere, a hand crossbow you had in your offhand, which basically meant anyone that wanted to get an extra attack out of a hand crossbow, they would just hold it in their quote unquote offhand and have their main hand be empty, or using a shield or whatever. It basically gives you a bonus attack, bonus action attack, very similar to dual wielding, but with a hand crossbow. And this is where the idea of like the demon hunter style playstyle, where you have two hand crossbows, because you don't have to worry about the loading property. You don't have to have you don't have to have a hand free to load it. Mechanic, or in universe lore wise, I don't know how you're loading a hand crossbow without something to load it. Maybe you have a belt or something. Do whatever you want. Mechanics wise, it just means you get an extra attack, just like if you were dual wielding crossbows. So that's how I flavor text most of mine that use Crossbow Expert for hand crossbows. And come on, who doesn't want to be that really cool demon hunter? That's just, it's cool. The next one we have is called the Defensive Duelist. I use this on my Shadow Monk because for forever his AC sucked. It does have a prerequisite. This will be the first feat that has a prereq, which is you have to have the dexterity of the 13 or higher, which once we talk about it, there's no way you would ever take this if you didn't have a high dex. Because what it is when you're wielding a finesse weapon with which you are proficient, and another creature hits you with a melee attack, you can use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your AC for that attack, potentially causing the attack to miss you. This is massively useful because even at like tier 2, that's between 3 or 4 added to your AC, which is massive. When you get to tier 3 and tier 4, you can do up to +6 to your AC. Now, it takes your reaction to do it. So it's only going to happen once per round. But if it's one of those things where, someone's coming in with a really nasty spell touch attack, or something really big like a dragon is making us swipe at you, and it's going to do 46 or 68 or something like that damage with a single attack, this can really, really save your tail. And I know this from experience because I've used it. Now, as a monk, I had to have one hand open in order to be able to deflect missiles. So the way that my monk did this is I had a dagger that I always used. I flavor texted that it was a sai instead of a dagger, but it was, the mechanics were all there. I just called it a sai. So I would always have a sai in one hand so I could defensive duelist, and my other hand open so I could catch arrows and the things like that if I needed to. And it basically meant it didn't matter what was hitting me, at least once I was going to be able to do something pretty powerful to prevent them from doing any damage to me. Which is a Shadow Monk was super useful. But really, any character that uses finesse weapons, anyone from rangers, rogues, fighters, there's you can build really good fighters that are dex based, even dex based melee, to create some really cool characters. even like a sorcerer might have a decently high dex score, simply because their only thing that they really need for their class is charisma. Yeah, anyone with that little bit of squishiness, if you can go from like a 14 AC to a 20 AC, or even at little lower levels, if you can go from a 15 to a 19, you've just changed from like kind of a wimpy cloth leather-ish armor wearing character to heavy, the equivalent of heavy armor for just a single attack every round. So yeah, super super useful. I don't see it used a lot, but I personally have used it and love it. The next one is massively popular. When people actually do play melee rangers, melee rangers use it. I've seen a lot of fighters use it. I've really any character. I have a paladin that uses this. The feat is called the Dual Wielder, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. And it has a lot of useful things. First things first, you gain a +1 bonus to your AC when you're wielding separate melee weapons in each hand. So if you're dual wielding, your AC increases by 1, which is super useful. Basically, a lot of characters like paladins and fighters, you have the choice between dual wielding, which gives you an extra attack, or sword and board, where you get a shield. The shield will add up a +2 to your AC, making it harder to hit. So you kind of have that, a toss up is, do I want to be harder to hit, or do I want to do more damage? With dual wielder, it lets you have kind of a mid road. You don't get the +2, you get a +1. But that, combined with something like defensive fighting style, can make up for the fact that you don't have a shield. So that's super useful. You can use 2-weapon fighting even when the one-handed melee weapons you're wielding aren't light. That's another really defining feature of 2-weapon fighting, is they have to be light. So for most, you're using 2 short swords or 2 scimitars, and that's generally it. With this, you can get really creative. You can wield 2 spears, or you can do 2 warhammers, if you want to get cool. I have my ranger has dual wields whips. Because whips aren't classified as a light weapon, so you can't dual wield them without this. But it's really interesting. They only do a D4 of damage, but when you're getting all these extra attacks, and you can attack from 10 feet away instead of 5, it makes up for it and creates a really cool, interesting character. And then the final one is you can draw or stow 2 one-handed weapons when you would normally be able to draw or stow only 1. That's a real nitpicky rule that does exist, where as part of your attack action, you can actually draw a single weapon. So if you're ambushed, you don't have your weapons out when you roll initiative, it means you can still attack on your turn. This just means that you can do it with both your weapons. I don't know too many DMs that make a big deal about having your weapons drawn before you attack, but it is what it is. So yeah, that one is used constantly, and it's used constantly because it's really good. But yeah, it's again, I use it on my characters. I'm not saying it's overused or anything like that. However, I do like when people use slightly different and more unique feats and things to make more interesting characters. Wow. So sorry about that. So, next feat is the Dungeon Delver. This one is very much an exploration focused feat. Specifically, you have advantage on wisdom, perception, and intelligence investigation checks made to detect the presence of secret doors, which again, your mileage may vary. If your DM doesn't do secret doors and stuff like that often, that's going to be completely useless. If they do, finding secret doors generally makes dungeon delves and the things like that very, very different. You may find a hidden cache of weapons. You may find a shortcut around a really bad encounter, or maybe a trap-filled hallway. Secret doors are always useful, so that can be cool. You have advantage on saving throws made to avoid or resist traps. Again, super useful for those dungeon delves, especially if you're doing a Tomb of Horror style adventure where there's just traps constantly trying to kill you. That can save your life. You have resistance to the damage dealt by traps, so even more useful. And then you can search for traps while traveling at a normal pace instead of only at a slow pace. That's another one where some DMs will really be a stickler for how fast you're traveling. In general, if I'm in a dungeon, I'm not really tracking how fast they're traveling, because a lot of times they're like going square by square if there's traps and things in there. So yeah, your mileage may vary. But if you want to make a kind of spelunker style character, again, a lot of people have avoid this because it's kind of purely defensive. And there's a lot of other ways to get around to traps and things like that. So people think, oh no, I'm going to take dual wielder so I can do cool, Drizz types of stuff. But if you're making a spelunking type character, first of all, there is definitely a place in every party for a character like that. And if you're a rogue or anyone that's proficient with the thieves tools, my monk is actually proficient with them because his background is criminal. It's massively useful to be able to be the person that goes in for first, and if you do accidentally trip attack, you're not gonna, or trip a trap, you're not gonna take too much damage. Even if you fail, you have resistance to the damage. So this is super useful that nobody uses. And again, if you want that really cool, interesting character, Dungeon Delver is a great way to kind of lean the character more towards that Indiana Jones style character. Durable is a really kind of straightforward skill. First, increase your con score by 1 up to a maximum to 20. Again, we've seen that before. The other thing, when you roll a hit die to regain hit points, the minimum number of hit points you regain from your roll equals twice your Constitution modifier. So this is for this is another way to deal with traps. For your meat shield, this is great. Because basically what it means is this person can go just get the craps slapped out of them. Whenever you take a short rest, they're going to be regaining more hit points because their minimum amount is pretty decently high for every time they roll a hit die. And then they're just going to be able to go into to take more damage. So the Binwin Bronzebottom's school of disarming traps, which is step on everything, and after it explodes, hope that Omen's there to heal you. Well, with durable, you don't need Omen. You can just heal yourself. And higher Constitution increases your hit point to the total. So, yeah. And then another one that I don't see used quite as often, simply because there's another of a feat in here that just gives you a bonus to your hit points total, and a lot of people tend to go that route. But yes, this is super useful. Elemental Adept is the next one, and this is really useful for casters in general. Basically, when you gain the feat, choose one of the following damage types: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. Spells you cast ignore resistance to damage of the chosen type. In addition, when you roll damage for a spell that deals this damage type, you can treat any one on a damage dice as a 2. And you can get this this feat multiple times, each time just choosing a different damage type. So if you want to create an elemental sorcerer, an elemental wizard, where they are really, really good at a very specific kind of spell. Elemental Adept, or a specific type of specific type of spell. Elemental Adept is your friend, and it can, especially when you're dealing with resistances and things like that. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of cripple your spellcasters. If you're a DM and the spellcasters are just getting a little bit too cocky, start throwing creatures with resistances to their favorite spells to use. If they're always using Fireball, throw in some guys that have resistance to fire damage, and they start wasting the third level spell slots because they're only doing like 5 or 10 points of damage to these people instead of the 20 or 30 they're used to doing. The ability to get your minimum rolls basically doubled. Anytime you roll a 1, it's actually a 2. Just means you're doing more damage more often. Again, it's a little bit in a niche, and generally you need to be a full spellcaster to get the full benefit of it. But again, if you want to be that really cool kind of pyromaniac character, or maybe like an ice wizard where all your spells are like that, you can kind of put yourself into a bit of a corner if all your spells are the same damage type. But with this, it helps you to kind of widen that corner. You're still not good to immunities, but there's not a ton of creatures that have full immunity to damage types. Really just super, super powerful ones, and it's generally only one damage type. So if you took this feat to twice and just had two different damage types, a secondary one, you would be golden. And with that, we're at about a little under 50 minutes. We've gone through, well, basically to 2 pages of feats. So I think that's where I'm going to end this one. I'll probably get to more feats in later episodes, just because I don't have to go through that whole intro like before. But I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope this is giving you guys ideas for kind of new and interesting character types to play. Like I said, I use feats constantly for my play my faves as a series, and when I used to play in the Adventurers League, I would use feats because I want to be unique. I want to play interesting characters, because I spend a lot of my time, I spent a lot of my time in the Adventure League running games and seeing every single standard character you can have, and seeing everyone using dual wielder or great weapon master, which we'll get into the next one. Or sharpshooter. Everyone uses the same feats. So I like using some of the little lesser known ones to come up with things. And it always throws people off in a good way when you come in and they go, oh, I hate this part because it's just so annoying. You go, oh no, I've built my character to deal with this aspect, or I have the thing that most people don't because I chose this lesser known feat. And they go, wow, that's really cool. I'm glad you're a part of our group. So yeah, anyway, in the comments below, let me know if any of the feats I mentioned here inspired you to create kind of an interesting character, gave you an idea of, ooh, I could create this kind of character using that feat. And that would be a lot of fun. Otherwise, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time, all right? Bye-bye!